Hello there, my name is Yorkie and welcome to the channel for episode 15 of the in-depth track guide series for Assetto Corsa Competizione. Just before we get into the video that's going to give you all the juicy details in order to improve your lap times around this track, I just wanted to say, if you're new to the channel and enjoying this in-depth track guide series, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It will be very much appreciated, and if you want to follow me on other social media pages, my links are down in the description below. So getting into this 14th episode, we are going to be taking a look at Kyalami in South Africa. The track length is 2.85 miles, which equates to about 4.58 kilometers, has a total of 16 corners, and will require a setup that utilizes medium downforce with medium to hard suspension. The key action areas around this circuit where you'll be able to make overtaking opportunities are going to be turns 2, turn 5, turn 6, 7, 8, turn 10, turn 13, and turn 16. So starting off with the pit lane, as we always do, this is the pit entry slip road here just before the final corner on the left hand side of the circuit. Pretty much as soon as you come onto the pit entry slip road, you're going to be hard on the brakes and slowing the car down for that pit speed limiter line. It's actually situated before the tight left hand or on the inside of the circuit and the inside of the barriers there. You can see that pit limiter board and also the line that spans the width of the pit entry lane. And then when it comes to the pit disengage line, you can do so right at the end of the concrete wall that's on the right hand side of the pit lane there, separating it from the track. And then as you accelerate out of the pit lane, you're going to need to stay left of the white line that extends out the circuit, goes through turn 1 and heads quite far down towards turn 2. So as turn 1 is pretty much non-existent, it's just a right-handed kink on the straight, we're going to go into the braking zone for turn 2. It's going to start just before the 100 meter board here on the right-hand side of the circuit, where you're going to be placing the car, shifting down through the gears and then starting to turn in towards the corner quite early on. This is going to be your apex point here on the inside curb. You want to be using it in both the dry and wet conditions. It should be in first gear. It's a smooth sloped curb with a slight step to it, and there's a slight bit of camber that will help you through the corner. And then as you power out through the exit, you want to come out towards this exit curb out here. You just want to be brushing it in the dry conditions. Avoid it completely in the wet conditions, as it's a traction zone. It will hurt your acceleration coming off the turn. There's not too much to feature here, just a little bit of painted tarmac beyond the curb itself. But coming off the curb, you're going to bring the car towards the middle of the track to try and open up turn 3. But you're going to turn in and hook up an apex here whilst remaining completely flat out in the dry conditions. You can use this inside curb in the dry, however you don't want to be climbing up onto it too early because it will bounce and unsettle the car and send it out wide through turn 4. And in the wet conditions it's best to just avoid this curb entirely. But turn 4 then immediately follows. You don't actually want to be running all the way over to the curb. You want to be positioning your car roughly about here, because this is going to set you up very nicely for the braking zone for turn 5. Effectively what you want to do is brake in a straight line, pointing yourself to the curb on the right hand side of the track, and then come off the brakes and turn the car in. You should be able to hook up an apex roughly around this point, and around here you should be picking up the throttle and getting on it quite aggressively to accelerate through the turn. You can use the curb on the inside in both the dry and wet conditions, just go a little bit careful in the wet. And then when you come out through the exit, you're going to track over to the right hand side of the circuit out here, use this exit curb with the little bit of concrete that runs just beyond it as well. But of course, as always in the wet conditions, you'll be wanting to stay off this curb to avoid any potential traction loss. After a bit of a straight, we want to be positioning ourselves on the left hand side of the track, ready for turn 6 sunset corner. Our braking point is roughly about 25 meters before the corner, and pretty much at the same time that we do a very slight dab on the brakes, we're going to be turning the car in, just letting the car float and roll through towards our apex. It's a very long turn, so you'll need to be patient, even more so where there is no camber in this corner. So just let the car roll in towards the apex, clipping it fairly latish in and around here. Be patient with picking up the throttle. You can use the inside curb in the dry conditions, however you'll probably want to be very cautious, if not avoid it entirely in the wet conditions. And then we're going to track out wide, making full use of the track width, using the exit curb that is out here in the dry conditions. As you can see, there's a bit of unpainted tarmac just beyond that before that quickly and abruptly finishes and turns into grass. And make sure that if you do run out wide, you get yourself back on track before this point. and then you want to get yourself back over to the right hand side of the circuit ready for the braking zone for turn 7. This is going to be the braking point here at the 50-meter board. You're going to be shifting down into second gear and aiming to hook up your apex on the inside curb just here. You should be able to run this curb fairly smoothly with no problem. Try not to take too much as it may potentially bounce the car out wide. You can do this in both the dry and also the wet conditions, but when coming out through the exit you want to make use of the rumble strip curb that is out here, along with the concrete is just there on the outside. Make sure not to dip a wheel beyond that onto the grass or gravel, as that will hurt your momentum. And of course, as always, you'll want to avoid running this curb in the wet conditions to avoid any potential traction loss. From the exit of turn 7, it's a very short run down to the left-hander of turn 8. This is going to be our braking point at the start of the curbing on the left and right-hand side of the track. You want to be positioned on the right-hand side to open up the corner. You're going to be braking and shifting down into third gear, floating the car in, aiming to take the apex curb here. You can ride up quite heavily onto this without too much of an issue, providing you don't climb onto the curb too early. Use this in both the dry and also the wet conditions, but what you want to mainly do through this corner is sacrifice the exit a little bit, because immediately coming off this turn we're going to transition into the right hander of turn 9. So we want to be positioned in the middle of the circuit, then turning the car in and hooking up the apex here. Note that there is no camber to help you in this corner, but what you ideally want to be doing is again climbing up onto the inside curb in the dry conditions. Do take caution with this in the wet conditions though, as it could slip the rear tyres when trying to get on the power. But you want to be doing that as early as you possibly can in the corner to try and give yourself the best run up the hill. Make use of the curb on the exit here, but don't go too far over, because if you dip the wheels over the white lines you will see yourself exceeding track limits. You can use this curb pretty much no problem in the dry conditions though. In the wet you can get away with using this curve from time to time. Do just take some caution. And then at the top of the hill you're going to come into a blind crest and into the braking zone for turn 10. Reference the marshal hut on the left hand side as your braking point, and you want to be somewhere in and around the middle of the circuit, pointing your car directly towards the tree that is immediately to the right of the TV screen there. You're going to turn the car in and aim to hook up your apex on the inside curb, or at least as getting as close to the inside curb as you possibly can. You can use this in both the dry and also the wet conditions. As you come through the corner you want to steadily feed on the power, but what you want to try and do is hold the car more towards the middle of the circuit off the exit, because turn 11 immediately follows. You should be trying to get the car as straight as possible and then being completely flat out through that corner, and then we're going to drift out wide and run this exit curb out here on this unpainted curbing that is on the right hand side of the circuit there. You can use this in the dry conditions, however you probably want to be avoiding it in the wet conditions just to avoid any potential traction loss as you start to run down the hill. We then come in towards turn 12, the very fast flowing left-hander. You're literally going to keep your car completely flat out in the dry conditions. It will require a lift in the wet conditions. You want to hook up the apex on the inside curb in and around here. You want to avoid the curb though in the wet conditions, as it will probably cause the car to understeer out wide. And then pretty much immediately after coming off this corner we're then going to be in the braking zone ready for turn 13. You want to be positioning the car roughly in and around the middle of the circuit for the start of the braking zone, pointing it towards the left, brake in a straight line and shift down through the gears down into first, turn the car in and aim to hook up the apex on the inside curb in and around this point here. You can climb all up over this curb without too much of an issue due to the slow speed nature of the corner. You'll want to do this in the dry, but in the wet do take caution. We're then going to come very quickly out to the exit, and you can make full use of this curbing in the dry conditions. Just try not to go out too far wide, as it will cause you to infringe track limits, so do try to keep at least 2 wheels on the curbing that's there. In the wet conditions, as usual, you'll probably want to avoid this in order to avoid any traction loss. Turn 14 counts as the very slight left-hander that leads in towards the braking zone that we see here, which is ready for turn 15. We're going to be on the left-hand side of the track. It's going to be a very short stab of the brake pretty much as we get to the red and white curbing that starts on the left hand side of the track. Chuck the car in and aim for our apex point roughly about here. As you can see, there is quite a big yellow sausage curb that is there on the inside, so we'll be wanting to avoid that in order to avoid bouncing out wide. So instead we want to be trying to get as close to the inside curb and just skimming it very lightly in both the dry and also the wet conditions. Coming out through the exit, you want to make full use of the track width, making sure that you don't actually dip the left wheels out over onto the grass or gravel, as that will cost you the momentum coming off the corner. We want to use this curb in the dry conditions, however do take caution or pretty much avoid it entirely in the wet conditions. And then we finally come down towards the braking zone of the final turn. We're going to be needing to place our car on the right hand side of the circuit for this, shifting down into first gear. Our braking point that we're going to be referencing is just as we get into the 50-meter board on the right hand side of the track there. And then this is going to be our apex point here on the inside curb. There's a very slight bit of camber here. We're going to be using first gear to come through this corner, and then we're going to be climbing up over this curb in both the dry and also the wet conditions, where we're going to pick up the power and accelerate and run out to the exit curb here on the right hand side of the circuit. Use this exit curb in the dry conditions, however don't run too far out wide as you will potentially infringe track limits. And then as always, to avoid losing the traction coming off the corner in the wet conditions, stay off this curb as that will hurt the run to the line and along the next long straight. So now that we completed the breakdown, let's take a look at the lap at full racing speed.
Well done, mate. The fastest lap so far.
So now that we set a pretty decent lap around Kyalami, I just want to finish off the episode by saying please be mindful of what your car and car setup is capable of. Some cars will be able to brake a little bit later than others. Some cars will be able to take curbs better than others. It's obviously going to be dependent on your car setup. It may have a slight factor as well. And then obviously the weather conditions are going to play a factor too. Obviously I've tried to highlight these things where possible, but please do take note and obviously apply accordingly to the session, race or conditions that you're driving in. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the episode. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, and if you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing, and if you hit the bell notification, you'll be notified each time a video goes live and you won't miss out on any future content. I hope to see you back for the next one. Until then, have fun, stay safe and take care.